Today on This Week in Space, we visit with Jeff Greason, new space guru, to talk about the future of human spaceflight.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is This Week in Space, episode number 30, recorded September 23rd, 2022. Why space? This episode of This Week in Space is brought to you by ZipRecruiter. Hiring is challenging. There's one place you can go where hiring is simple, however, and that's ZipRecruiter. ZipRecruiter finds and matches the right candidates with your job. Try it free today at ziprecruiter.com/TWIS. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. Hello and welcome to another episode of This Week in Space, the Why Go to Space edition. I'm Rod Pyle, editor-in-chief of Adasser Magazine, and I'm joined by the indomitable Tariq Malik, editor-in-chief at space.com. How are you, sir?
Hello. I'm doing well, Rod. How are you doing today?
Well, I'm just ducky. Today we're going to talk with my old pal, Jeff Greason, who I think might be best defined as a space polymath. Jeff is the co-founder and chief technologist of Electric Sky, the chairman of the board of the Tau Zero Foundation, and has worked with reusable spacecraft projects a number of times. He's also worked with the FAA's Office of Commercial Spaceflight Transportation and has been named to a number of NASA advisory boards. He's a noted expert in a lot of things, but perhaps most exciting, besides what we're going to talk about today, is interstellar propulsion. Hello, and how are you, Jeff?
Great to see you. I'm well, thanks.
Good. Oh, you have a new background. I like that. So we have a couple of things to do before we get rolling. We have to have a couple of space jokes, because we always have a couple of space jokes. And Tariq, eventually I'm going to charge you with bringing in a space joke, but I've got two short ones today.
Sure.
So,
sure.
hey, Tariq.
Yes, Rod?
Why do some stars want to get PhDs?
Why do some stars want to get PhDs, Rod?
Because they want to be brighter, of course.
I love it. I love it. That's really funny, Rod.
Yeah, it just knocks me out. Why does Mars have a crush on the sun?
Why? I don't know.
It's the center of his universe. Oh, I got two drum snaps today.
All right.
I was gonna say. This is even hideous for me. All right. Some headlines. Tariq, why don't you rock up first with an update on Artemis?
Yes, I'm here with our obligatory Artemis I update. We actually just got out of a briefing with NASA talking about their latest big plan to try to get this giant rocket off the ground. And it will be, if you've been listening to us, they've had all sorts of problems with the fueling processes. They've tried to launch twice. They haven't made it. They did have a fueling test this week. It was, to quote NASA, like watching paint dry when they start fueling it, when they gave us a preview. But they were able to actually tank the entire rocket for the first time. They've never done that before. Even when they were trying to do the original fueling test, they actually got to the part where they had filled it with the 736,000 gallons of liquid hydrogen and oxygen they need to launch. They even performed that chill down test that we discussed, I think, in our last episode, where they were able to cool the engines and so they'd be ready to accept the fuel. They did see some links in the same place, the same two quick disconnects that they saw during the scrubbed launch attempt, which is a little disappointing to see, but they were able to manage them. And there was a question today that said, hey, why is that acceptable to manage a leak in a system that was designed not to leak in the first place? And they did roll out it's a brand new vehicle. We're learning all the foibles description again. So they seem to have a workaround for those leaks in the liquid hydrogen system. Now, we were talking all about the waiver. Are they going to be allowed to even try to launch? Because the Space Force had that rule that they have to check the batteries on their flight termination system. That's the system that blows the rocket up if it veers off course. And of course, they've been over that for a few weeks. They crossed that boundary back on like the 6th of September. They did, in fact, get that waiver, not just for the September 27th launch attempt, their next window. That's right. But also October 2nd. So, if everything goes well, they can try to launch for at least those next two attempts. So that's all the checks on NASA's to-do list that they had to get to the launch pad. But now, out in the Atlantic Ocean. There is Tropical Depression 9. It is forecast to reach the Florida on launch day with tropical storm force winds. They can't have the rocket at the launch pad for that stuff. And so they're really watching their projections to see if they have to roll back to the VAB. Anyway, after all this work to not have to roll back to the VAB, they might have to do it because the storm is coming. And they're going to decide that as we're talking now on Saturday, September 24th. So tomorrow is the decision day on if they have to do that. They can't have the rocket moving with 40 knot winds. They can't have it at the pad with 70 knot winds. And they're worried that the wind speeds from this tropical depression right now, maybe even a named storm later on, could exceed that. So not you don't want to risk your 322-foot rocket to winds after all that work. So we're waiting to hear back now. So that's the next big thing. They just can't catch a break, it seems.
Well, in terms of what you're risking, I would guess that the billions and billions and billions and billions and billions, how much should I say, and billions of dollars is more risk than the length of it. It is interesting they talk about this new technology. I mean, it's a new system, but by golly, some of it looks like a straight off the shuttle, so you'd think it wouldn't be that difficult, but what do I know?
And they well, one of the things that did come up, that was specifically asked, and the NASA engineer that's in charge of the system, he actually oversaw, I think he said like 100 plus space shuttle launches, 200 tankings. They saw these kinds of leaks in those flights as well, but they weren't just publicized as much. They weren't in the media as much because it wasn't by then the shuttle flights were for the most part routine. And so they were able to manage those leaks. So that's kind of what they're saying right now, is that this might be part of how the system is working, and they'll just work to iterate it and build something better on the next one.
Turn up the fans higher. All right. Well, let's move from that to a what will almost assuredly be a big smiley face happy story, which is the DART mission, the double asteroid redirect test, on Monday the 26th at 7:14 Eastern time, correct?
7:14. This is something that you out there, you space fans, can put a lock in. This is physics because NASA has their DART spacecraft.
Wait a minute. But last 4 hours are autonomous navigation, so we could have issues. I don't think we will. But,
we could.
It's a little trickier than just aiming and pulling the trigger.
That's right.
So let me explain what it is before we
should.
Go on,
Yes.
So the 1,200-pound DART spacecraft will smash itself into a small asteroid called Dimorphos. This is the first planetary defense mission ever, as we've discussed, which is intended to prove that we can nudge a potentially dangerous space rock away from impact with Earth if we do it early enough. The target is a 500-foot wide rock orbiting a larger asteroid called Didymos. NASA has characterized this, and I love this, as ramming a golf cart into the Great Pyramid. Nonetheless, however, it's expected the impact will toss up about 2 million pounds of material, which is a pretty good-sized impact crater. Change the orbit of the moonlet just enough that it can be observed from Earth and eventually from a European spacecraft called Hera that'll be cruising into the neighborhood in 2026, 2027. With over 25,000 larger objects orbiting the sun in the neighborhood of Earth at one time or another, this mission is critical to understand how we might deal with Earth-threatening space rocks in the future. There is much to be learned, and larger objects, say a half mile across or so, would require something different, like a tractor engine that would be able to nudge it off course, or, of course, there was always the consideration of nuclear warheads being detonated close enough to alter the trajectory of the asteroid. So, any other updates, Tariq?
Well, yeah, this is really exciting. It's not, Bruce Willis type stuff of defending the entire planet from an asteroid, but I spoke with the scientists behind this mission earlier this month, and they told me that this asteroid they're going to hit is the size that could take out a city or a good chunk of a country. And so this like 200, 100 plus, a meter wide asteroid, these are the ones that NASA doesn't know where they all are. They know where the really big planet killers are for the most part. They can track them. And the little tiny ones tend to either break apart or aren't as big a concern, but it's this kind of Goldilocks type asteroid, this size, that they don't know where they all are. They can they can't see them all because sometimes they come out of the sun or the sun's direction. And they want to know, like, if they can spot it a few years in advance, like 5 years, what can they do to kind of nudge it? And, we didn't talk about this earlier, but Dimorphos is actually the moon of a bigger asteroid called Didymos. And
Right.
instead of smacking an asteroid that orbits the sun and then having to wait an entire year or plus as it moves around to see how its orbit's changed, Dimorphos orbits Didymos like once every 11 and a half hours or so. So any kind of change in that orbit, they'll be able to see it a lot faster. This is all happening about 7 million miles away from the Earth, 11 million kilometers. So there isn't a lot of hurry up and wait to see like what happened. There's a little cube that's chasing it, Leacha cube, that'll take a picture of the ejecta. We think maybe those images will come out a day after, and it's happening almost like in prime time, 7:14 at night. NASA will have like an evening broadcast around like the 6 o'clock news time period for folks on the East Coast, just in time, I guess, for a late lunch or an early dinner for you, Rod. So it seems like a lot. I think all eyes are going to be on NASA at this point, even if they don't try to launch the Artemis I mission on the next day on the 27th. So we'll have to see how this works, because if they can prove that they can move the asteroid with this mission, then they can scale it up as they need to, depending on what the situation might require in the future to protect us from big impacts.
And we should mention that neither Didymos nor Dimorphos or the object that's being orbited pose any kind of direct risk to Earth. That's just the target they chose for the reasons you already elaborated. And I believe you have a third story for us.
Yeah, there's a really wild one that came out of the International Astronautical Congress this week. That's this great big confab that moves from country to country every year, and it's where all of the space agencies, a lot of companies get together to roll out kind of new plans to explore space, or ways to build businesses on space. And this new story is from a new company called Vast Space, and they're based out of Southern California, Rod, and founded by a cryptocurrency billionaire. His name is Jed McCaleb, and they want to build a space station and spin it so that it has artificial gravity, real sci-fi type stuff. To pursue commercial spaceflight, commercial science, manufacturing, that sort of thing. In space. Now, it's a very small company, 20 employees, brand new. Some SpaceX veterans I can see here on this list in the space news story that we were reading about it. But they're saying that that they really want to give this a go. McCaleb apparently told his friends, according to Space News, that if he ever had a ton of money, he was going to mine the asteroids, and now he has a ton of money from cryptocurrency investments. So I guess he's making a bid for it. So they want to basically build a large station and then spin it to create that force, so that astronauts aren't just floating around in zero G for years at a time, and see what they can do with that. So interesting to see if it happens. I've only seen some illustrations of their space station. It looks like a long tube with a bunch of solar arrays on it that'll spin about the center. But we'll see if that happens. It's very space agey, but it's a lot of money to put into it. If it's really going to become a reality, we have to wait and see.
Well, it's exciting, and they do have a couple of competitors, Orbital Assembly Corporation among them, but we'll see what happens. And
That's right.
I wish him well, and I'm heartened to hear of his success, because I just know that my Dogecoin is going to come rocketing back up from 2 cents any day now. By the way, those first two stories came from space.com, last one from spacenews.com. And we will be back to talk to Jeff Greason after this short message, so stay with us. This episode of This Week of Space is brought to you by ZipRecruiter. Hiring is challenging, especially right now when you have so much on your plate. Luckily, there's one place you can go where hiring is simple, fast, and smart. A place where growing businesses connect to qualified candidates, and that place is ZipRecruiter.com/TWIS. Hiring can be a real challenge. When I was working in the television business not that many years ago, we had to fill jobs on an almost daily basis, and I cannot tell you how frustrating it was to watch people parading through my office one after the other, day after day, who were either not qualified or marginally qualified for the job. Most of them didn't get hired. But the problem was always figuring that out before they got there and tied up my time, which was, at least in the opinion of some, valuable time. And I wish I had had ZipRecruiter at the time. because ZipRecruiter does the work for you. It's got powerful technology that finds and matches the right candidates with your job. You can easily review recommended candidates and invite your top choices to apply, and they'll be the ones you'll spend your time talking to. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. Boy, that would have been nice. ZipRecruiter is the #1 rated hiring site based on G2 satisfaction ratings as of January 1st, 2022. And right now, to try ZipRecruiter for free, our listeners can go to ZipRecruiter.com/TWIS. That's ZipRecruiter.com/TWIS. ZipRecruiter.com/TWIS. ZipRecruiter. It's the smartest way to hire. And we're back. Jeff, it's always good to talk to you, although it sometimes taxes my brain a bit. In the past, we've discussed a lot of topics. Actually, I shouldn't say sometimes. It always, even when I try to steer you on a topic I think I know a lot about, you end up sort of putting me into the weeds. But it's good to be humbled. You know, between you and my girlfriend, it's a state I've become used to. We've talked about a lot of things in the past, ranging from interstellar flight to space settlement and other things. And today I'd like to start a little differently with the bigger question which surrounds us and everything that we do. As we all of us here know, since the earliest days of the space race, the public in general has asked that vexing question, why are we doing this? A lot of people balk at the cost of going to space, and although there is a conception, not just among casual observers, but among a lot of so-called experts and academics, that there was some golden age in the Apollo era where the public was lined up behind this. It's actually, if you look at the bigger question of do you like NASA, should we be going to space, the polls, other than a few spikes like during the landing of Apollo 11, the polls are pretty consistent at about 50-50, and it drops dramatically when you start asking more specific questions. NASA came up with their best set of answers they could back in the day. The playing field's changed dramatically since then. And although some of the reasons those questions are made, at least we have more private money in it now. But there's still a lot of people that when you say how excited you are about space travel, they go, well, we have problems here on Earth. Why are we doing that? And when I say space travel, I mean exploration and development. And I don't know anybody better qualified to answer the question than you. What do you think?
No pressure.
None at all. Just the future of human spaceflight.
Let me break that question apart.
Please.
Obviously, in the market democracies, the majority of the economy is not state-run. So, increasingly, asking when you have opinions about what should and shouldn't be done in space, to a large part, you're asking the question of why do other people spend their own money doing the things that they want to do? To which, in some sense, the answer is, well, it's really none of your business. Any more than it is, why do they buy houses? Why do they buy cars? Why do they buy college educations? Because they want them, is the answer to that. But obviously, space still depends on certain key expenditures that are in the public sector. And it is a perfectly legitimate question to ask, why should there be public expenditure on that? It's not a, I gotta put this right. I don't think it's correct to say that NASA or other public agencies, quote unquote, did their best ever to explain to the public why that's a necessary expenditure. I think instead there's been kind of passing rationales of the moment as people are groping for reasons to sell the program du jour. And I think it's been a real weakness of America in how we approach the development of the economic frontier of space, that we don't talk about it in larger strategic terms. So there are multiple reasons why that is a worthwhile and appropriate public role. One is because the U.S. is and wishes to remain a great power among the powers of the earth. Like it or not, it is not all one big happy globe. There are other great powers. They have their own interests. Sometimes those interests align with ours, sometimes they don't. And space is now and has been since about 1960 an absolutely essential domain for operating military forces on the surface of the earth because of reconnaissance and communications and detection of targets and tracking and things like that. You just can't be a 21st century military force without space operations. And so closer to home, away from the lofty stuff that we much prefer to talk about, the United States, as other great powers do, does spend money on space in terms of maintaining our space assets, putting up new ones as the old ones wear out or as we need new sensors. And an increasingly important role is going to be what I refer to as preserving the freedom of navigation of space. It has long been the United States position that taking pictures of the Earth is not a hostile act, that it is okay for us to have satellites for communication and navigation and timing and reconnaissance that are orbiting over the territory of other countries, and that you shouldn't shoot them down. And I think it's been a very peace-supporting posture that we have taken that attitude, because having an open world where you can see what people are doing is a great deterrent to various kinds of hostile action. So that spending is necessary. It will continue. And we have a strategic interest in defending the freedom of navigation of space, just as we have a strategic interest as a country that depends on ocean-going trade in preserving the freedom of navigation of the open oceans. Now that, in principle, is a role that will increasingly be taken on by the U.S. Space Force. Historically, is a role that's been largely taken on by the U.S. Air Force. You might think that NASA doesn't have a role to play there, but it does, because by doing highly visible non-military peaceful missions in space, that plays a role in space not unlike freedom of navigation exercises on the ocean, where we're demonstrating that there are in fact peaceful uses of space. We are supporting the continuing ability to exercise those peaceful uses in space in a non-threatening way, and signaling to other powers that we intend to continue to support the freedom of navigation of space. And maybe I should pause for a question there before I go on to the loftier stuff about NASA.
I was gonna break in because I get asked this question, Jeff, all the time. I mean, I got asked it about actually yesterday, because we're talking about Artemis I and they want to know, like, why are we still doing this stuff? And to me, the bulk of it is, here we are talking right now we're talking through like computers and stuff. Like a lot of this stuff we get because the technology is advancing, and they have to do that if they're going to go into space. We take it for granted. If you've got your cell phone, why do we go into space? So that you can make calls on your cell phone a lot faster and get internet and streaming, which we didn't have when I started, right? And we've got that now because we've got all of these programs in place. So I guess to break it down, it sounds like the argument that you have in your hip pocket is, yes, there's that lofty goal. Space is out there. Everest is there. It's because it's there, that we want to go out there. But at the same time, we want to use it. And use what we build from exploring it, and then protect what we're able to use for future, for all humanity going forward. We're seeing a lot of the contested nature of that now with new rivals. Like I think Russia was just saying that satellites can be a legitimate target in times of war, and that
exactly.
kind of really dovetails into what you were just saying about.
Why are they saying that? They're saying that because there's been almost nothing that has been more disruptive of Russia's ability to attempt to impose its will by force on its neighbors than the fact that we now live in an open world. And, not only can their neighbors see what they're doing, but the world news organizations can see what they're doing. Everybody can see what they're doing. And people other than major nation states, you don't have to have your own satellite constellation now to make a satellite phone call or use a satellite internet connection. You can use the public access through private networks. And so what can nation states that wish to be aggressors do about that? Well, they can either just accept that or they can start shooting down the peaceful birds. And if we don't want people shooting down the peaceful birds, we better have some way of deterring and or defending peaceful assets from hostile interference. Mm-hmm. And that, this is bread and butter stuff. This is not the fun stuff. This is not the lofty goals. This is just exactly the same thing as, a great power also has to be able to, that uses oceans, has to be able to defend its maritime commerce. A great power that, has hostile neighbors on land has to be able to defend its borders. Otherwise, it's not a major nation state. It's a satellite of some other great power that does have those capabilities. So, space people don't like talking about this stuff. There's a lot of internationalist, we should be above that kind of thing sentiment in the space community.
Star Trek
and there's
thinking, we call it.
There's nothing wrong with wanting to look towards a future in which we will need less of those kinds of things. And the truth is, major international conflict has been growing less likely, in part because of things like this. It didn't just happen. We took steps to open up, quite consciously, to open up the game, to open up the world and make it not possible for societies like the former Soviet Union to operate in total secrecy. Most modern wars are not done because of popular pressure rising up of people who want to carry out an aggression against their neighbors. They're mostly done from the top down by rulers who don't necessarily feel like they have to tell their own population what they're up to. Increasingly, as those reconnaissance and communication capabilities become more distributed and harder to block, it's made international conflict less likely. But we do not, much as we might wish otherwise, we do not live in the world where, if we just lie down, if the lion lies down with the lamb, chances are only the lion's going to get up. So, we have to deal with that as a reality, even if we don't like it.
But
now I'd like to move on to the loftier stuff because that's more fun.
I was gonna say, well, one of the I think the stark examples of that dichotomy is the fact that we're talking about Russia obviously as an aggressor, and yet yesterday as we're speaking, Russia launched a Soyuz spacecraft, 2 cosmonauts, 1 American, Frank Rubio, first trip to the space station. They got there in like 4 hours, and in two weeks or so, SpaceX is going to launch their first Russian cosmonaut on a Dragon, Anna Kakuna. She's going to fly to the space station on the 3rd if this storm doesn't come in with that Crew 5 mission, and that'll have 2 American astronauts and a Japanese astronaut at the same time too. So it's kind of 2 different examples going on about you need to protect all of the assets out there so that you can have that peaceful exploration of space and all of the benefits that come from it. And then we still have this kind of global partnership thing going on also at the same time. So it's almost like having cake and eating it too, but in a really tense environment. But Rod, I don't know. You've got questions too, so let me hand it over to you.
I do. So far we've been talking, as Jeff pointed out, primarily about government-supported programs and NASA. But of course, we're in a new era where space flights become more affordable, and it will become increasingly affordable. And there are large private players involved, especially in the U.S. And why, especially in the U.S., is a different conversation, although an interesting one. But Jeff, what are, in terms of the whole why question, there's some economic arguments to be made. What are some of the potential profit areas in space, and how do you see that playing out?
Okay, so let me start from the lofty and work down to the more practical. The lofty end is to point out that civilizations and national governments rise and fall. And we all like to think that we've outgrown that, and that we don't have to worry about that anymore. But probably we haven't. You can never be sure. But, within living memory, the Soviet Union collapsed, and they still haven't recovered from all the consequences of that. It's really hard to look at how interconnected the world has become, as I think more people are aware now because of the supply chain disruptions of the pandemic, and realize that economically it really is just one planet right now. People are depending on goods and services that are made in countries they couldn't find on a map, whether they know it or not. That integration of the world economy is what's led to part of the tremendous expansion in living standards over the last 50 or 60 years, because more and more people are participating in the world economy. That's a good. The downside of it is the world has become more interconnected, more interdependent, and therefore more fragile or more prone to disruption by accident or error. So the solution to that is, if you want your cake and you want to eat it too, is to have more diversity, more outposts of the human economy, more outposts of human civilization that are separated from each other by enough barrier to trade that it makes sense for them to do as much locally as they can, but are connected enough by economic links and trade so that they can help each other out. And then if there were a disruption to one of them, the others would be able to step in. If one of them had an emergency and lost some specialization or some technology, it would still be being practiced in the others. You're immunizing yourself against some of the consequences of civilizational collapse and avoiding or greatly reducing the probability of an extended dark age, which would be a very unpleasant thing to live through. That's one reason why it's a public good to put some public investment into expanding the reach of the civilization, as successful societies have done throughout their periods in history. And the good news is this time there's no natives to displace. So we don't have to worry about getting our hands dirty.
No natives that we know of, right?
So, well, yeah. if we encounter that would be a great problem to have, to find that we have expanded to the point where we have found some, and of course that would enter an interesting debate. But at the present time, we don't know about any.
Let me ask you, Jeff. Just so we're talking. You're talking about what seems like a really big picture economic push for like an off-world economy that would, I guess, have returns for the rest of us on Earth, and then also I guess for companies in space. There are so many different companies now. I mean, in the 20 years that I've been covering it, that I would have never have expected before. Things like, there were just last week we saw the launch of a satellite that'll give people phone access directly from space, or SpaceX launching 50 satellites at a time for seamless access. And that just seems like there's so many different companies that are just doing that now, let alone GPS that you mentioned earlier, and communications and whatnot. Where is the money gonna go? We've got launch vehicles, right? That's one thing. There's spacecraft and tourism. That's like another. We've been talking about manufacturing for a long time, but I haven't seen that crystallize yet. And I'm wondering if those are the next areas. NASA seems to be serious about this moon base plan finally, and that there's actual movement happening there. And I'm just kind of curious where you see maybe like the to the average space I don't want to say follower, but like space fan, like what should they be looking to in terms of either a new economic example, a new building, that kind of a thing?
Okay. Well, one answer to that is if I truly knew, I would have invested in it already.
Before you do that, give us all the tip and then tell everybody. So.
Yeah, but space manufacturing has been a great white hope for a long time. It hasn't happened yet. A lot of people think that means we didn't find things to do. That's not true. We found lots of things to do. But industrial research and development for commercial products works on a time horizon, 3, 4, 5 years. If you want to invest in a new product or service and you don't expect to get into the market in that kind of time frame, you just don't invest. Mm-hmm. And so it's not so much the cost even, but the pace of space access to on-orbit laboratory facilities has really been far too slow to support commercial R&D. If it takes you 5 years to get an experiment designed, manifested, approved, and flown, you don't do one experiment and have an industrial process. It takes many, many iterations to get an industrial process worth doing. So it's not surprising. What has happened is every time we found something we could make on orbit productively, by the time people have done enough experiments to work out a practical way of doing that, other people have said, now that we know it's a thing that can be done, we have found a way of doing it on the ground. Mm-hmm.
And I assume it's a lot easier to build that stuff on the ground.
Right. The technology doesn't just happen in a sequence. Which things you invest in is a function of how easy it is to do a thing today. So, if it had been faster to do the R&D development on orbit, people wouldn't have invested in the ground alternative. They would have just kept doing the easy thing. So there is reason to suspect that as we make space transportation access faster and easier to get, these conditions may change, but they haven't changed yet. So until they do change, anything you say about space manufacturing is very speculative. We all hope something is going to come to fruition, but it hasn't yet.
So, and I guess just the only follow-up I would have there then, you've seen SpaceX is launching rockets like once, sometimes twice a week now. They've got their own cruise ship. They're flying private flights now. They've got another one planned for later this year. Stepping that up where they're just scheduling them. If they've got like a private destination to go, Orbital Reef, that private space station that Blue Origin is championing. If they've got those kind of going on a regular basis, is that the kind of access that these companies need to make
access to private facilities where they have suitable laboratory environments is one of the things that we need. And now let's bring it back to the question you asked about what's the public sector role? Okay. It is advantageous to the United States to have those kinds of companies develop first in the United States, because then we will be advantageously placed to benefit from those developments and to lead that new sector of the world economy. We have invested a lot of public money already, wisely or unwisely, in developing the capability and demonstrating the capability of maintaining on-orbit facilities in the form of the International Space Station. And there are, I'll talk a little bit if we have time about some basic research stuff that needs to be done, but there are ongoing national interests of the United States that we're not done learning the things on orbit that we need to learn. So it would, in my view, be an excellent use of public funds for the government to step in and say, okay, we no longer want to be the owner-operator of space facilities, but we recognize that the market for them is still speculative and early. So let's be a U.S. government tenant of one or more private space facilities so that the private facilities can now experiment with offering this faster, easier, cheaper access to private clients. The government can continue to do its research objectives, and we can do that with less cost to the taxpayer than what we have historically done with a government-owned, government-operated facility. But rather than just completely washing our hands of it and saying, hey, private sector, you just stand up on your own, maybe we can have a training wheels phase where more moderate but targeted expenditures of public funds help to pull forward the development of that economy and increase the chances that U.S. companies will lead the way.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to spin this in a whole new direction in a few seconds, but before we do that, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back with Jeff Greason. So far we've been talking about activities that at least to some extent, or I would define anyway, as humans optional. We haven't mentioned it yet, but I forgot to say that you're also on the board of governors in the National Space Society, which is focused very much on space settlement. And we've often talked about the imperatives of human expansion in the solar system. And when we've talked about that, you've often brought up the Polynesian expansion, and that is sort of a historical model for where you see this going, I believe. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Okay. People are an absolutely essential part of an economy. People are what generate demand. People want things. And, as Werner von Braun joked, they're also the only form of computer that can be mass produced with unskilled labor. So the reason, one of the barriers to the economic development of the energy and material resources of space is that, to put it in economic terms, the cost of labor is so high. Because every single person that you have operating, you had to bring up from the earth, you had to supply them at great expense with nothing brought in locally. This is a difficult state of affairs to operate with. This is not a new problem or a new. It's an old problem in new clothing. For 100,000 years, humans have been finding themselves expanding into new ecosystems that they are not able to thrive in without new technology. Whether that new technology is control of fire, or the development of clothing, or the development of coastal seagoing vessels to fish and move across the terrain in, or flint knapping, or pottery, or, cord for fishing lines, etc. If you look for the characteristic of human beings, this is what we do. We find new ecosystems that we can't currently live in, and we figure out ways to live there, and that expands the range of the human ecosystem. And that use of an invention of both new technologies and new forms of social structure for living in those new environments is what's made human beings such a successful species. When we have done that, right, from the examples that we can read about both from prehistory and from anthropology of cultures like the Polynesians that didn't leave us written records but left us a lot of evidence about how they did that, and more modern examples like Iceland, or the settlement of the Azores, what you find is some common themes. And one of them is it's not what you'd call profitable right away, because there's this hurdle you have to get over, right? If you move into a new area, you have to get enough people there that they can, it quote unquote takes a village. You need enough people there to set up a human community. They have to develop some kind of equivalent of subsistence farming. They have to grow their own calories or harvest them from the environment. They have to be able to build some kind of shelter to keep themselves alive there, and they have to be able to expand from their local resources, their population. You have to be able to have kids, and if those kids need a canoe, you have to have enough surplus labor around that you can make a canoe. And it's only after
that sounds like a Mars base, Jeff.
Yeah, it is the same problem. It is true, is absolutely true that going to the moon or going to Mars requires a much higher level of technology than it did for the first humans to go to Australia. But we have a much higher level of technology now than we did when human beings first reached Australia. The fact that it's harder now doesn't mean it's harder in proportion to the increased pace of our technology. But I do want to say, we don't have all the technologies that we need sufficiently mature and demonstrated to count on yet. Life support is still breaking too often. It still needs too many spares delivered from the Earth. Much less work has gone on in things like how do you grow crops in these environments than you might think. And I view that again as a classic role for public sector funding. One of the core missions of NASA, when chartered, is improving the technological capabilities of the U.S. aerospace industry so that it remains the leader, or at least the most competitive in the world. And just as the USDA has been funding, or the Forest Service or the Agriculture Department in its predecessors has been funding for over a century agricultural research stations so that you can do things like learn what crops grow in Utah, or learn how to do forestry management with the trees that are growing in the Pacific Northwest. It is a perfectly appropriate use of public investment to learn what it takes to live in new places and develop those techniques so that private actors can benefit from them, because we as the public have a public interest in our citizens and our companies being able to do that. We benefit from the fact that they are then able to do that, but not right away. So if we were going to benefit right away, we'd say, well, that's a private investment. It's going to be profitable. Go forth and make that profit. To say instead that if we make these investments in 30 or 40 or 50 years, there may be thriving human communities on the moon or Mars that will be in a position to begin trade with the Earth, and we will reap all the benefits therefrom. That is why it's an appropriate topic for public investment.
Great. Wow. The discussion, the example of Polynesian explorers makes me think a lot about interstellar space. I know that with Tau Zero Foundation, you've done that a lot, and we're coming off the heels of the Voyager and anniversaries, not just of their mission, 45 years of that, but 10 years of being in interstellar space in particular. And I'm wondering what's it going to take. We talked about we still got technical hurdles just to get to the moon to stay or Mars. Although clearly Elon Musk and some others have plans on their own on the private side to do that. But I mean, what has been the big? Is it just scaling it up tenfold for an interstellar mission? If we can get to Mars, can we get to another star, or is there more stuff that we need? Do you think that we're just not ready for to handle?
Well, in terms of propulsion, it's a lot harder than just scaling it up tenfold. The propulsion challenges of going to the other stars are truly immense. But the good news is there's been a lot of progress in the last 15, 20 years, more than is appreciated. And I can start to see that were we to start making public investments in, if I can quote from the NASA Act from memory, improving the speed, utility, range, etc. of aerospace vehicles, I think that's a tractable problem. I can actually imagine that we could start launching robotic missions, in 20 or 30 years that are genuinely intended to go and circle other stars, and human missions could at some point follow. In terms of life support, which is where the technology needs further maturation for even operations in the solar system, the good news is that's kind of the same problem everywhere, right? It's still the same human being. Investments in figuring out how to increase what's called the closure of the life support system. In other words, we're continuously reducing the amount of new stuff you have to bring in, and also reducing the spares requirements, making more and more of the parts of your life support system something you can manufacture locally from your natively available materials, and less of it something you have to bring from Earth or stock as a bunch of spares that you bring with you. That's the same problem everywhere. And if we can figure out how to do it in Earth orbit, that will benefit you being on the moon. If we can figure out how to do it on the moon, that benefits being on Mars, and all vice versa. And by the by, exactly the same people who are likely to decry, quote unquote, spending resources in space because we have problems here on the Earth. Well, what are these problems we have here on the Earth? Are we worried about running out of resources, or are we worried about the environmental footprint of human beings on the Earth being too big? Are we worried that we need more sources of energy that have less environmental impact? Well, where do you think we're going to figure out how to do all those things?
This is the argument, Jeff, that I tell them when they ask me all about that. You want to know about making the most of your water resources in an arid environment. They have to recycle everything on the space station right now. If they want to preserve those resources for the longest time, or purify things a lot easier and faster with a portable system. So
and on the Earth, we have cheaper alternatives right now. Now, not necessarily better alternatives, but cheaper alternatives. In the space environment, we don't have those alternatives. We have no choice, if we want to operate there, but to invest in the technologies that improve the closure of the life support system and reduce the amount of new stuff that you need. But once those technologies are developed, we can, if they're affordable, we can apply them anywhere. So it's not, you could say, well, we could figure those things out on the Earth. But the truth is, we won't, because we don't need them.
Yeah, there isn't a push to do it, right?
We just want them. But in space, we need them. There's a big difference on your research priorities between working on the stuff that would be nice to have and working on the stuff that you have to have. And in space, these are technologies we have to have. And once we have them, there's no reason we can't continue to use them in environments where we would merely find them nice to have.
And then someone will find some other use for it that is amazing, an artist or a musician or something else, and it will turn it into something totally different that we wouldn't have even thought of when we needed, the widget or what's it that has made life better,
Yeah, who would have thought that the most important product that we would ever import back to Europe from the New World would be this crazy idea that people could self-govern? It was an idea. Yeah. It was massless, but it had tremendous impact. That was a bigger deal for Europe than potatoes or tomatoes.
This brings me to what was going to be one of the 14 questions I have left for you, which I think we're going to, I'm not exaggerating, but I think we're going to have to push off to another episode for most of them, because the one that would spin us into our second hour is questions about government in space, intergovernmental relations in space, different forms of human rights considerations. And I just have this inkling you have some things to say about that. But instead, I'll close on One of the big discussions we have in the National Space Society, which you are, as I pointed out, a major part of, and outside, are is it more likely or more beneficial one way or the other to be looking at free space settlements, either in low Earth orbit or out in one of the Lagrange points, or lunar or planetary surface settlements? They each have their advantages. They each have their disadvantages. Do you, just off the hip, although I suspect you thought about it a lot, have a preference or inkling of what we might expect first when we're talking about something of some scale?
It's hard for me to envision anytime soon a human community that needs zero material to operate with. So the challenge of a free space settlement is that free space settlements don't exist, and this is a deliberate pun, in a vacuum. They need an economy, a set of trade routes, whether that be from the Earth or from the Mars or from Luna or from near-Earth objects or all of the above. You need sources of stuff. Your habitat's built from something. Try as you might, you have some rate of leakage and you have some rate at which your parts break. You need resupply of oxygen. You need resupply of stuff that you build your spare parts out of. So I'm confident that if the human expansion into the solar system takes place, free space settlements will be a part of it. I spend more of my time thinking about how do we get over step 1 or 2. And in step 1 or 2, you're going to need human beings on, something that has mass so that you can start exporting stuff, even if that stuff is just dirt, regolith, raw material. And why do you need people there at all? Because somebody has to fix the robots. But once you have people there, you can't, as I sometimes joke, you can't have 10 people in space for very long before they want a bar. And you can't have 30 people in space for very long before they want somebody who specializes at cooking better food. So, if you let those kinds of things happen, what you think of as a mining outpost is probably going to turn into the first off-world human community, whether you plan for that or not. But saying where the first one is no prejudice to saying where the second one might be. And free space settlements might turn out to be a very big deal, especially if, which we have no knowledge of, you need that much gravity to stay healthy. If, on the other hand, lunar gravity turns out to be enough, maybe free space settlements won't turn out to be such a big deal. I don't know. But I think more about step 1 than I do about step 3.
And I suppose it might be possible that a planetary surface such as Mars would be enough for general health, but people might have to travel to an orbiting full 1G facility to reproduce. Which is
it's possible.
I hadn't really thought about.
Although, of course, you can put centrifuges on the surface of planets as well if that was the kind of thing you needed. But, to again bring it back to why do public investment at all, don't you think this question about finding out the fundamental biological research of how do you keep human beings healthy for longer periods in space, don't you think that'd be a useful thing for us to know? And it doesn't pay off in 5 years. Therefore, if we want to find out, we probably have to make public investments in finding out.
Well, it sounds like it's time to do that. Jeff, any final comment you want to leave us with?
Yeah, I will tease the subject that you raised so that if people are left wanting more. One of the things that I think is so exciting about space is that we will restore what has been, prior to, say, 300 years ago, the human norm. The human norm has been, there are many different communities, many different societies. They aren't all alike. And if we have many of them, you can experiment with new forms of human social organization. Now, most of those experiments will be unsuccessful. Historically, that's been the way it's worked. They usually fail. But occasionally, they spring forth new ideas that other people can imitate and adopt. I'm very excited by that. I think it'd be incredible to once again live in a world where there were, 15 different lunar settlements that are all separated by vacuum. And guess what? Their customs and their ways of living are very different from each other. And I think that would be a wonderful thing, not because I prejudice the outcome of what those experiments will be, but because there'd be experiments. People would try new things.
Well, I think when the time comes, I will choose to live in Jeff World just because it's going to be a more interesting place than most.
Not Tariq-topia? No? Everyone's
chance.
invited.
I'm too lazy to live in your world because you're always running at 200%. Jeff, thanks for making time for us today, and thanks to you, our listeners, for welcoming Jeff to the show. I hope we'll have him back soon. Jeff, where can people keep track of what you're up to and what's new in your professional life?
I publish papers and give talks, most of which I put videos of up on YouTube. So if you Google my name on YouTube, talks will come up. You can look at the Tau Zero Foundation for some of the work going on there. Unfortunately, my day job, we haven't put a lot of public stuff up yet. I work at a beam power propulsion company for my day job, trying to develop electric aircraft and space launch vehicles. But we're still running pretty quiet, so I'm afraid other than the occasional published paper or patent, there's not much to follow right there. But Google me on YouTube, and interesting talks will come. Well, talks I think are interesting will come up.
Well, power beaming, that's a whole other episode, Rod. That sounds exciting.
Yeah, well, I've got 17 written down now. Tariq, same for you?
Well, as always, you can find me at space.com and on Twitter at Tariq J. Malik. J stands for just awesome. I think someone asked me about that the other day. But
I think J
one
stands
way
for
or
jeez.
and
awesome.
and
Give me a break.
if NASA does not roll back Artemis, wow, I got the crickets from Ant. Oh, I'm so embarrassed.
No, I think I got the crickets, but go ahead.
Well, if NASA does not roll back the Artemis I moon rocket for the Tropical Depression 9 or whatever it is, then I will be at that launch attempt on the 27th. And if not, then I will be at the DART impact on the 26th. One of those two things is going to happen, and I will be at one of them next week. So look for you there.
Okay, well, don't forget I got you a place to broadcast from in case you need to be on the show while you're out of town, at least if you're at Kennedy, because the National Space Society will soon be moving its operations to the Kennedy Space Center, which is very cool. As for me, you can look at my continually aging website, pylebooks.com, which I'm going to start to update this week. Or if you want something more up-to-date and more directly beneficial to your reading curiosity, you can go to adastroMagazine.com, where we have all things Ad Astra Magazine, which is the publication of the National Space Society. Don't forget to drop us a line at twis@twit.tv. That's twis@twit.tv. We welcome your comments, suggestions, ideas. Oh, most of them anyway. And we answer each and every email. Each and every email. All 17 that come in each week, I answer personally. Thanks for joining us for this discussion with Jeff Greason. We plan to have more. And if you have any specific questions you'd like us to ask him, because so far... Let me see. Jeff, I don't believe I've ever asked you a question you couldn't answer. So
there's always a first.
Space related, I think we'll have something pretty good. New episodes published every Friday on your favorite podcatcher, so make sure to subscribe and tell your friends and give us reviews. We love reviews. 5 stars or a thumbs up or 3 noses or whatever it is you have to click to let people know that you love the show. You can also head to our website at twit.tv/TWIS. And you can follow the Twit Tech Podcast Network at Twit on Twitter and on Facebook and twit.tv on Instagram. And I think you should do all of those because we're that interesting. Yeah. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.
I'm going to say Twit's also on Twitch, by the way, which I've been watching the podcast through there too, if people are interested.
Well, and it's in the word Twitch, so what an amazing coincidence. All right, thanks everybody. See you next time.
Listeners of this program get an ad-free version if they're members of Club Twit. $7 a month gives you ad-free versions of all of our shows, plus membership in the Club Twit Discord, a great clubhouse for Twit listeners. And finally, the Twit Plus feed, with shows like Stacy's Book Club, The Untitled Linux Show, The Giz Fizz, and more. Go to twit.tv/clubtwit, and thanks for your support.